Well, let's just jump right into it. As we've said, I've written a book recently published called Managing the Black Hole. It's an executive guide to software project risk. And so the thrust of the book is to examine root causes of software project failures and related issues of productivity and quality and schedule compliance. And this book is maybe a little bit of a different approach than most of the books that are out there. My intent was to write this in kind of plain English. It's a substantive and in-depth examination of key issues, but it's not written in real technical terms. So I've identified what I believe are the primary root causes of failures. I call those the 7 deadly sins. We'll talk about those more as we go along here. And I've also talked about some things you can do to remedy those problems, to prevent them. I call those the 5 redeeming virtues, and again, I've kind of focused on what I think are the key items. This book is targeted really to three different audiences, and probably these overlap quite a lot. First, and most broadly, it's targeted to anyone who's concerned with reducing risk and improving delivered quality and achieving higher productivity in any software project, but especially with emphasis on larger projects. Second, it's, as I said, it's written in plain English. It's not a very technical book. It certainly deals with substantive technical issues, but there's no geek speak in this book. It's written with the intent to be understandable to executives who really don't have any software experience. So I think, a point I make in the book is, I believe a lot of failures are at least contributed to by executives who are making unreasonable demands, who don't understand enough about our business, and consequently this attempts to explain these issues to them in terms that they can understand. And then finally, it's also aimed at anybody who needs to communicate with these kinds of executives about the issues in our field. I think a lot of us find it real challenging to explain some of the realities of the software development business to folks who don't have a background in that field. So this is intended to help those of you who may face that challenge to communicate perhaps more effectively with some of your business partners. And perhaps in many organizations there are CIOs and others at higher levels, even within the software and IT groups, who may come from the business and don't have a background in software and IT. So this book is intended to help communicate more effectively with those kinds of folks. This is a quick look at the table of contents. As I said, the first part of the book is really some statistical background about our industry, the grim realities. Maybe some of these things would be familiar to a lot of people who are in the software business. We know there's a significant rate of failure. There are lots of cost and schedule overruns, and this really kind of documents that and also provides some background on why this occurs. And then part 2 deals with why projects and software groups have a significant amount of failures. Again, that's the 7 deadly sins. And then the third part of the book, which is where we're really going to focus today, is to focus on what can be done about this, and I call that the 5 redeeming virtues. And actually we're going to focus on those outlined in red here. We're going to talk just a little bit about sizing and estimating, about professionalizing planning and status tracking, and about predicting and measuring defect containment, and a closely related topic, monitoring cost of quality. So I think at this point, this is, as I said here, the focus a little bit redundant. Let me go on to the next slide here. And Matt, I think you wanted to pose a few questions.
And this is really my first question that I encountered when we were going over this before was, why did you pick these 3 to talk about today, the improving estimating, critical path and earned value, and defect containment and cost of quality?
Well, I picked these because, I guess, 2 reasons. First, we're somewhat limited for time, so I didn't want to make this too lengthy, so I wanted to narrow down the focus. And the second reason, maybe more importantly, I wanted to focus on what I would pick out as maybe the three most frequent causes for grief and the three areas that we need most importantly to focus on. In my career, I've done quite a number of runaway project turnaround engagements where I was brought into some kind of a project that was way over schedule or over budget or in trouble for some other reason. And when I've been called into those things, I've found that these three things are far the most common problems that need to be immediately addressed. And I also find that these things are all things that these problems could have been prevented had they been recognized early on. So that's why I chose these three things to focus on. The first, as you said, has to do with estimating. If we start off with a bad estimate, we set ourselves up to fail. And I would say 80% of the time I'm involved in a turnaround project, one of the major contributing factors is that the original schedule was completely unrealistic. What I call the 3-minute mile. You might know if you're a runner that the world record is about 3 minutes and 40 seconds for a mile. And so nobody's run it faster than that. And but all the time I see software schedules that are equivalent to 3-minute miles. Objectively viewed, they never had any chance. The schedule may have been negotiated down their throat, so to speak. Somebody made an unreasonable demand. So part of what I've attempted to do is focus on that and provide an explanation for that dynamic and how to prevent it in terms that are understandable to executives. And then similarly, a secondary cause, also very frequently present in a runaway situation, is that the planning initially was inadequate. It wasn't enough detail. It wasn't done using best practice. And frequently related to that, status reporting is often very misleading, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then frequently we encounter later in the project a recognition that there's a serious quality problem. Probably a lot of us have seen situations where the original schedule expected that maybe we'd use a third of our time to do testing, and when we actually get in it, we find out there are a lot more defects than we thought, and so the original 1/3 becomes 2/3. So let me jump right into the estimating issue. It is my contention, again from my experience, that business executives need to understand much better than they do today the dynamics underlying software project estimating, and there's a dynamic relationship that's not well understood even within the field between size, schedule, quality, risk, and cost. Those things interact with one another in complex ways. And when we don't understand that adequately, as I said, frequently schedules get set up that are the equivalent of a 3-minute mile. And one of the key things that should always be done in any significant project to avoid that is to have an independent should-cost estimate for every large project. I think one of the challenges we face is, for whatever reason, fairly or not fairly, an awful lot of business executives are pretty skeptical about the estimates provided by software folks. And part of that's justified because, let's face it, we have not had a great record of being able to produce estimates that turned out to be true. On the other hand, it's equally unreasonable and unpromising when executives, respond to our estimate by saying, no, that's too long, you have to cut it by 25%, and by the way, we're not going to increase the budget. Well, that's totally unrealistic. It never works, and we need to make sure that somehow or other we get that across to executives. And one of the ways that can be done in many instances is if someone independent, not the developer, someone